If you enjoy the story, give it a like and feel free to leave a comment. Also, be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon to be the first to hear new cryptid tales. I'm always looking for stories to share, so if you've had your own encounter with the unknown, send me an email at cryptidtalesmail@gmail.com.
I would like to start by saying I'm an avid hunter, hiker, and all-around outdoorsman. I was going to the South Dakota School of Mines at this time for engineering. It was late October 2012. I went solo camping in the Spearfish Canyon area on Black Hills forest land. The location is near Devil's Bathtub. I was going up an unused logging trail when I noticed the sun was getting low, so I knew I had to find a place to rest or I'd end up setting up camp in the dark. I quickly found an overgrown logging trail that veered off to my right. The foliage consisted of either aspen or a birch thicket butting up to the edge of the trail with very little room to walk on the gravel trail. This continued for 20 yards, at which point I came out into a fork in the trail. The fork had a patch of grass just big enough in it for me to set up my tent, as the surrounding area was strung with rock, uneven ground, and thick overgrown trees. I watched as the sun set and laid in my tent for what felt like an eternity, as the sun was setting by 7-ish at this time of year, and I of course forgot my book back in my vehicle. I startled from my relaxed state, for all of a sudden I received a call. This was unusual because cell service drops when you go into the canyon, but I was high enough up to get a few bars. The call was from an officer working for the Spearfish Sheriff's Department. He had seen my car at the trailhead. Usually only people go on day hikes in this area as the terrain is too aggressive for any camping, and it's very popular for inexperienced hikers to get hurt on. The sheriff thought the worst and was able to look me up on Facebook and found my phone number, thus explaining the call. We chatted for a short while, and once he figured out I was well equipped and knew what I was doing, it put him at ease and called off a supposed search party. Apparently the party hadn't left Spearfish yet, but still. The sheriff told me to give him a call once I made it back to my vehicle the next day. Real down-to-earth guy he was. I then called my parents, who had been informed I was lost, to put them at ease. I finally attempted to go to bed. Of course, sleep would elude me this night. I had been laying in my tent for a couple hours, not able to sleep. It was 11 p.m. when it all started. First, I heard what sounded like a bird whistling a short tune a couple feet to the east of me, but it sounded more like a person. A second after that, what sounded like a tree trunk hitting another tree trunk came not too far away from my tent to the south. And 15 seconds after that, something on 2 feet started walking towards my tent. The steps were slow, long, and heavy. All I could hear was the steps, and then came the skunky, trashy smell that almost burnt my nostrils. I sat up in my tent. Rainfly wouldn't allow me to see outside of it, but I drew my hunting knife and I screamed at the top of my lungs all the profanity I could muster at whatever had approached my tent. The scariest part was, it stopped for a second and continued with its long, slow, heavy stride beside my tent and headed in the direction of the tree noise I had heard earlier. It made no other noises, but the smell lingered for a good 15 minutes as I laid in my tent quivering. I called the sheriff about a half hour after this and described the whole account. We talked about every detail I could think of and walked through every animal it could have been in the hills. Nothing matched up. He told me he was an avid hunter of the area, and it sounded like nothing he's ever encountered. He then asked me if I was planning on coming back down that night. I made the decision to stick it out, since I didn't want to be stumbling around in the darkness with whatever was out there, probably not too far away. I passed out from all the adrenaline. This was not the end of my experience. I awoke at around 2 a.m. and started hearing more tree knocks in the same general area of the last time, and then the whooping noises started. First came a whoop near the tree knock area, and then whoops were a few seconds apart, maybe a mile away, and more whooping noises and tree knocks were heard even farther away, possibly across the canyon. I laid there in the thick of it, not ever experiencing anything like this before, shaking in my sleeping bag with my sorry excuse for a hunting knife. I can truly say I've never been that scared in my life. I felt like the noises were coming from all over the forest. At this point, I accepted my fate and was comfortable with the thought of death, as I didn't know the intentions of these creatures. I look back and laugh at the thoughts I had. These literal monkey-like whoops continued for about 15 minutes, and I didn't once think of recording it due to my paralyzing fear. Each whoop sounded different depending on the area it was coming from, and would differ in length and strength. As soon as the hint of light crept over the trees, I slowly unzipped my tent to find not a single sign of whatever had been there the previous night. Of course, I didn't know what to look for at the time. I quickly packed everything up and hiked out the same way I came in. Before I left that offshoot trail, I turned around and said thank you and bowed, in case something or someone was listening. I wanted to let it know I was grateful, even though it wouldn't understand. I called the sheriff as soon as I charged my phone in my vehicle and let him know what all he had missed. Once again, he was dumbfounded. I never was big into Bigfoot before this, but ever since then I go into the woods with a different level of respect. I grew up very close to the big thicket and spent my life in the woods, but I began to feel uncomfortable in there, unlike hunting or hiking anywhere else. My husband also noticed this feeling of being watched or hunted, as did guests we brought with us. The first experience we had, my husband was sitting on the ground hunting for deer. He saw some movement far up in a pine tree. There are large birds, like eagles, hawks, woodpeckers, etc., so that's what he expected it to be. But a head and shoulders peeked around, looked at him, outstretched an arm, and then it jumped to the next tree over. Then it proceeded to jump from tree to tree, approaching towards him. It was a small woman or large child size and too far away to make out much other than its shape, but it clearly was ape-like. He left before it got any closer, and we left out of there for the day. There were no other experiences that year, which was 2016. I dubbed this general area Bigfoot's backyard jokingly. At this point I knew he saw something, but I wasn't really ready to call it Bigfoot. We no longer camped out there after that. The next year I was in this same area, walking very slow and quiet, listening for squirrels. I was squirrel hunting, dressed in camo, and was closer to the dirt road than the lake. It was in October and almost dark when I heard this growl, if you can call it that. It came from the thick brush about 50 feet behind me. It was the deepest, most guttural grumph. We don't really have bear here, but I fully expected to turn around to a grizzly bear as loud and deep as the growl was. But I didn't see anything. We left immediately. Later in November, my husband was hunting a few hundred yards from that same spot, and something growled at him until he left. Deep guttural growling. This was 2017, and we no longer waited until after dark to leave our hunting spots. A couple of acquaintances of my husband, a father and son, were looking for a public land spot to hunt deer. He gave them a tour of the spots off of that dirt road. These guys moved here from bear country, so let that be known. They had tree climbing stands, so no visible ladder from the ground. They go out there by themselves. They pick Bigfoot's backyard to hunt in. The son arrives first and climbs 30 feet up a tree. It is the exact spot I was growled at before. A little later, the dad arrives. He comes in, crosses a little creek right by the son, and goes down toward the lake. It gets quiet. Then the son heard something walking. He naturally thinks it's a deer. He watched a huge, dark, hairy creature walking upright on two legs. Not just walk in the direction of where his dad went, but walk the exact trail he took. There isn't a phone signal in that spot. He told me he wasn't about to move in case it saw him. The dad was never aware he was stalked by Bigfoot. Climbed up in the tree and didn't see anything out of the ordinary. They never went back. I think that was in 2017, November or maybe December. This year, my husband went out there first and hunted Bigfoot's backyard and told me it felt comfortable in there. This lulled me into going back out there. I didn't feel comfortable at all. I heard strange whistling and sniffing noises, and the next time, loud repetitive whoop, whoop, whoop. I declared the woods still had Bigfoot and a few deer, and I wasn't returning anymore. So the husband goes a few times by himself. One evening, he sits in a lean-to stand that is maybe 1/8 of a mile from Bigfoot's backyard. It has a ladder and is 12 feet off the ground. This is a new hunting spot, and unfortunately, a Bigfoot hunting party stumbles onto my husband. He is facing a draw with a small creek that runs down to the lake. This was to his left. The dirt road is through some thick brush to his right. Behind him and across the draw is more thick brush also. They clear-cut timber company land a few hundred yards ahead of him, although it's not visible from the stand. It's a Monday, and he is the only human out there hunting. 5:15 p.m., November 18th, 2019. He sees the back end of a deer go into the woods. It had crossed the draw, had come in downwind, and was heading towards the clear-cut area. My husband was dressed in full camo, hadn't used any spray scent killer, and had in fact gotten a scented candle on himself. He hears a strange deep humph from the brush behind and to his left. At first he thought it could have been a deer, although a strange noise for a deer. It makes a low groaning noise and starts moving back and forth in the brush. It's obviously big and heavy. Then it starts making those noises again, very loudly. This makes my husband very uncomfortable. Then it does a howl, like a wolf, but cuts it short. Like a 2-second extremely loud howl that just abruptly ends. Hair-raising howls. Another abrupt howl answers him from down the draw towards the lake, followed by 3 loud knocks, loud as gunshots. We assume they were tree knocks. Then the one closest starts talking in gibberish. Hearable, but not loudly. My husband announces that if it is a person playing a joke, they're about to get shot at. The gibberish stops and is replaced by even louder growling, and it advances towards him. He fires a shot from his rifle towards the growling, because at this point he is fearful of being attacked. They start charging towards him. He could see the tops of the brush parting way. The loud growling and brush was breaking so loud, he shimmied down the ladder and ran for his truck, pushing his way through the brush. The 2 growling creatures stayed just a little bit behind him, all the while growling, breaking over small trees and just ripping brush up. They chased him to the road, but never stepped out. He ran to his truck and left. Based on these experiences, there are some facts that I truly believe. Bigfoot is a real animal, not a mythical creature. It is smart, hunts in pairs or groups, and is definitely a meat-eating predator, and in this area deer and wild hog are plentiful. It has communication skills, although primitive. It has a very good sense of smell that would rival that of a dog or a hog or a deer. Their young spend a lot of time in the trees. They drive their prey into areas where it is easier to catch, like close to water. They most likely have scouts when humans are in the area, and their family unit is close by. They do not like humans to surprise them, and will do their best to scare the humans out of their territory if they deem them too close or too dangerous.